Hello. Sorry. I want to take a minute just to read a little segment from Generations, the History of America's Future, 1584 to 2069 by William Strauss and Neil Howe. I'm going to share what I am reading on the screen, and we're going to read it together, and I'm going to predict our future if you're a Gen Xer. So this book was written, just a little bit of a history. This book was written or published in 1991. Obviously, it was written prior to that by two people, William Strauss and Neil Howe. And this is a business science. Generations is. And so I'm going to read to you just a few things that are on the cover and on the back before I get started. And then I'm going to read to you our future that they had planned for us all the way back when they published the book in 1991. So Newsweek says a provocative and engaging analysis of the rhythms of American life. And then when I flip it over, USA Today says Generations is brilliant. And then it has the Washington Post says this is a book that explains a lot. And Oakland Tribune, the Oakland Tribune says Generations might change the world as much as Darwin's Origin of Species. And then I'm going to read, this is in the category of history, this book goes down in. And I'm going to read just a little thing back here. It says, so you know what the book's about, okay? It says, hailed by national leaders as politically diverse as former Vice President Al Gore and former House Speaker Newt Gingrich, Generations has been heralded by reviewers as a brilliant, if somewhat unsettling, reassessment of where America is heading. William Strauss and Neil Howe posit the history of America as a succession of generational biographies, beginning in 1584 and encompassing everyone through the children of today. Their bold theory is that each generation belongs to one of four types, and these types repeat sequentially in a fixed pattern. The vision of Generations allows us to plot a reoccurring cycle in America's history, a cycle of spiritual awakenings and secular crises, and from the founding of colonials through the present day and well into this millennium. Generations is at once a refreshing historical narrative and a thrilling intuitive leap that reorders not only our history books, but also our expectations for the 21st century. Now, I am not going to read the whole book today. I'm only going to read this little bit right here, a few pages about us, if you're a Gen Xer. So let me go over here. I'm going to scroll up and we're going to read this right here. So this is, 408, sorry, right here. Completing the 13er diagonal. Now, if you read the book, you'll understand what diagonals mean. Don't worry about it right now. I'm just going to read to you this, and you can read it along with me. So you can see exactly what's going on today, and you can realize, hey, well, fuck me. They knew, so they did. So here we go. So completing the 13th diagonal. The generational cycle is a sneaky fortune wheel for a reactive generation. That's us. We're 13ers. The 13th generation. I'll keep reading. If you have questions, put them in the thing. We'll talk about it later. Thanks, Hewlett, for letting me use your channel. It spins, it turns, and just when it lets you think you've lost, it tantalizes. Just when you think you've won, it clicks again, and you've lost. So will it be for 13ers? Entering rising adulthood in an inner-driven era. This is going to be the years of 1991 through 2003. This is when the Gen Xers are the 13th generation, a reactive generation, a nomad generation, a rebellious generation. All of these words are attached to this generation. So they're going to be changeable, and you'll start to see that here in a second. So from the years of 1991 to 2003, remember this book was written in 91. This was our future. We're past this. So this is our past at this moment. The Society for Acceleration of Time, which I find is a neat name for a society, calls upon boomers, that's baby boomers, to hurry up, get old, and get out of the way. Organized fleetingly in 1989, this mock series, this mock serious 13er lobby articulates the feelings of many of today's 25-year-olds. An anxiety about whether young adults can ever rise out of the shadow of the domineering boom. And the nation's next great generational rivalry is brewing and on the edge of bubbling over. Throughout America's history, the nastiest one-part generational feuds have been between midlife idealists, that's the boomers, and rising reactives, and that's the Gen Xers. This has happened every time between the Puritans and the Cavaliers, the Awakeners and the Liberty, the Transcendentals and the Gilded, the missionaries and the lost. Idealists invariably come to look upon younger reactives as a wild, soulless, and quote, bad generation, while reactives see older idealists as pompous, authoritarian, and, in power, more than a little dangerous. 13ers and boomers are already beginning to regard each other this way, and during the 1990s, this mutual suspicion will harden. And the last skirmish between these two oil and water types arose just before World War I, grew mean after the armistice. If I say things wrong, just get over yourself. And contributed, that's why I have it on the screen, so you can also read along with me and go, she don't know how to say that word. Thank you. Write how to say it in the comments. That'd be a nice thing to do. And contributed mightily to the roar of the 20s. And something like this, quote, roar lies in America's near-term future. This cycle suggests that 13ers will suffer an alienating event when their first cohorts are in their 30s. This nasty stroke of history will convince them that theirs is indeed a luckless life cycle. It could be AIDS. This epidemic, which has thus far mainly struck the boom, will ravage the 13th if it expands unchecked. Or it could be a diplomat-directed but youth-scourging military campaign. I wonder if that's what we're looking at. Something on par with the progressive-led intervention against Kaiser Wilhelm II or the Enlightener-led war against French Canada. And lining up the 13er life cycle with those of the Liberty and Lost, such a campaign would occur sometime in the early 1990s. But most likely, the alienating event will take the form of an economic downturn. Even a brief one will serve the purpose. Economic threats loom heavily over the 13er horizon. To begin with, their first class graduated from college in 1983, which means that this generation's aspiring elite has yet to confront even mildly harsh conditions in the national economy. Second, never before in Americans' history have public benefit, quote, safety nets, end quote, been tilted so heavily towards retired elders, no matter how affluent, and away from rising adults, no matter how poor. The great majority of 13ers in poverty, for example, are not eligible for a penny in subsidized health care. Finally, many are coming of age with unprecedented financial burdens. No previous American generation has arrived in the workforce paying such high tax rates on their first dollar of earnings, bearing such large high-interest student loans, facing so many anti-youth, quote, two-tier wage and benefit scales, or encountering such high housing costs relative to income. If the economy weakens, 13ers will feel stranded as a generation, sensing little of their elder goodwill GIs enjoyed through the Great Depression, nor the public exaltation of youth that buoyed boomers through the stag-fleeted 1970s. To their regret, 13ers will find themselves paying a price for the generational criticism they've endured, but did not answer, through the 1980s. Young workers will find themselves perceived and treated as the most expendable employees. To keep their jobs, they will have to show not just promise, but bottom line results. In sharp contrast to the 1950s era experienced of the rising silent, many 13ers will pass through their 20s unable to sustain the quality of life and especially the level of consumption they enjoyed as adolescents. Many of those from affluent families will, quote, boomerang back to parental homes, which we did, dragging out their child era dependency. Those from harder pressed families will fall into an unsupported poverty. As the year 2000 approaches, the worries of circa 1990 youth will crystallize into a bleak adult reality. Theirs may be America's first generation since the Gilded to reach age 40 with a lower standard of living than their parents had enjoyed at the like age. These setbacks will send shockwaves through the most market-oriented rising generation since the circa 1920 lost generation. That's lost. Unlike the silent and the boom, 13ers, self-esteem rests heavily on hopes for economic success, a fact confirmed by countless youth polls over the past decade. Once they perceive themselves failing in the marketplace amid continuing criticism of their cultural and moral deficiencies, 13ers are likely to react in the same hard-bitten manner as the Losts did when they encountered the missionary vice squads. Missionary being a missionary generation. Many will quietly blame themselves. Others will lash out against midlife boomers, who remain contemptuous for the 13er ideas and aspirations, in stark contrast with how the rising adult boomers were treated by their own next elders. Boomers, by then standing in the way of their jobs, pay, and promotion, will require 13ers to prove themselves in a hotly contested marketplace, in effect, forcing them to move in what boomers will consider the, quote, wrong direction in order to survive. In the boom's midlife quest will impose moral judgments on grown-up breakfast clubbers, will strike a growing chorus of 30-year-olds as pitiless and Scrooge-like. Once alienation sets in, 13ers will accentuate behavior patterns that today strike older generations as frenetic, is that it? Frenetic, soulless, and physically shocking. Confirming elder judgments that this truly is a, quote, wasted generation, 13ers will then put their own stamp on the American mood, and there will be no mass movements or organized plans. Instead, they will burst forth with a hedonistic cross-culture culture that will look, taste, smell, sound, and feel anti-boom. It will be definitely non-cerebral, probing the physical devil where the light-aged boom once probed the spiritual sublime, seeking pleasure where next elders once sought beatitude, evoking the black prankishness of Halloween where the hippie culture once evoked the image of spring rainbow. Young novelists, filmmakers, songwriters, and columnists will produce works that will seem interesting if puzzling to the aging silent, wholly inarticulate to boomers, and keenly expressive to 13ers themselves. This clash of jaundiced rising adults with righteous midlifers will resemble the 1920s, not the 1960s. By the late 1990s, professional athletes will offer an exaggerated example of what will be happening to 13ers throughout the economy and culture. Pay will be increasingly market-driven and disconnected from the bargaining power of organized labor. Year-to-year results will be rewarded more than lifetime achievement. The stars who can win show Ruthian bravado and fill arenas will make fantastic sums enhanced by international bidding. At the other edge, non-star journeymen will lose ground and attract little public sympathy when they fail. The fun in sports will have a brassy quality, more akin to pure entertainment than civic ritual. Boomers will look upon 13er athletes as gladiators, and will pointedly urge millennial children to look elsewhere for role models. Throughout the economy, the 13ers' preoccupation, indeed their need, will be personal and economic survival. For many, the clearest path to success may be to leave elder-led institutions and strike out on their own. They will seek market niches where quick deals matter more than big words, and will take care of tasks boomers may find useful, if a bit distasteful, such as delivery services or solid waste disposal, for instance. Such businesses will bring fortunes to a lucky few, but most of those engaged in them will be poorly paid. Looking for a lightning strike of success, 13ers will dart from job to job. Their mobility will be discouraged, will discourage employers from investing in job training or from offering pensions to new hires. The international marketplace will provide this generation with its most promising economic frontier and a way to take advantage of its unappreciated linguistic and computer skills. At times, young entrepreneurs will engage in global business activities. Their elders will look upon as piratical, opportunists, even traitorous. Is that what that says? Traitorous. Many will seek their fortune in the service of America's creditors, helping them purchase, manage, and liquidate American assets. Lucrative opportunities may arrive in nations with fledgling capitalist economies, in enterprises like fast food, fashion, and entertainment. Boomers will regard video stores as prog, as a symptom of decadence, and the silent will despairingly contrast their own Peace Corps days spent teaching English to Nigerians with the young McDonald's employees teaching Hamburger 101 to Muscovites. 13ers will never be widely attracted to public service or the nurturing professions, such as teaching, medicine, and the ministry, in the manner of the GIs, silent or boom. Instead, whatever their careers they will aim for opportunities with a bottom line. Their economic realism will strike many elders as unfeeling, selfish, even reactionary. But over time, 13ers will shrug off these complaints. We'll call them a compliment. They will shrug off these complaints. Like all rising adult reactives before them, they will see themselves as nomads, driven by necessity in a world whose economic harshness is not their fault. Even as they scramble after new opportunities, 13ers will react with skepticism to world events that elders may hail as promoting human freedom. Any further euphoria of elders silent over, quote, breaking down barriers will remind them of their chaotic childhood, something that felt good in every generation but their own. If chaos brings new ethnic and economic unrest, and if that's led to conflict, it will be their job, not their elders, to fight any war necessary to clean up the mess left behind, the sort of, quote, modern war, as Hemingway put it, in which, quote, you die like a dog for no good reason. Reminiscent of the Doughboy Lost, and homecoming celebration for 13er soldiers will be tinged with elder criticism and will heighten feelings of alienation. We've seen all of this so far. In war or out, 13ers will find themselves bearing a major share of the burden for any economic or social transitions, but they won't be easily succored. Like the, quote, don't tread on me liberty of the 1760s, life's hard knocks will taught these 30-year-olds to stay away from the complicated abstractions of the aging silent and the high-minded crusades of the midlife boomers. As the boom rises to power, 13er voters will turn even more anti-government than they are today. As boomers begin endorsing global crusades, 13ers will turn towards isolationism. And like 90s era lost generation, that's a lost generation. Well, that's the name of the generation, in case you don't know. We'll take pleasure in revealing elder, quote, lies. Well, we're doing that now. In families, communities, national polities, 13ers will press to simplify the complex, narrow the bloated, and eliminate the unworkable. They will be drawn to blunt, no-nonsense candidates. 13er culture, and that's what they're doing. They're giving us blunt and non-nonsense, no-nonsense candidates. That's what they tried to do with Trump, if you remember. 13er culture will be far more ethnically diverse than the booms. Oh, where the lost capulated Eastern and Southern Europeans to prominence, 13ers will do the same for Hispanics and Asians. The Chinese democracy movement and political controversies in Latin America will provide the grist for poignant intergenerational clashes. With this new ethnic diversity will come a new youth-propelled racism and a prosperity for, quote, hate crimes. Holy shit! We should have just been reading this book. Lacking a cultural center of gravity, 13ers of all backgrounds, including the white middle class, will feel at risk in ways their boomer and silent parents did not. The most stellar young ethnic achievers will encounter a festering racial hostility from their own peers, much as the Jewish lost did in the 1920s. Most of the children allowed to grow up poor or unskilled in the 1970s and 80s will carry their incapacities and pathologies with them into adulthood. Through the 1990s, unmarried mothers and the undereducated of both sexes will remain just as employable and dependent in their 30s, and dependent in their 30s, as well as as they were in their teens. Effort to adult remedial education will be half-hearted and ineffectual. Worse, many of today's youth gangsters will ripen into adult facsimile, waging Capone-style wars with police, most of whom by then will be canny 13ers themselves. Older generations will blame the nation's problem of crime, drugs, and disintegrating inner cities on their attitude of treating life as a game. By the late 1990s, the 13ers wholly fill the crime-prone phase of life. Street crime will be perceived as evil, and the criminal beyond rehabilitation except through the sternest of regimens. Once boomer judges go to work, this will almost surely become the most permanently warehoused and executed generation in American history. I'm going to read that one again because that's a really good sentence. Once the boomer judges go to work, this will surely Once boomer judges go to work, this will almost surely become the most permanently warehoused and executed generation in American history. We're warehoused and executed. Goody for us. Nor will many 13ers rise to defend their criminal peers. By their ethos, if you're bad and you're caught, you don't complain about your punishment. Rising 13ers will sense that they will never gain much collective esteem from others. Americans who today look upon 25-year-olds as a wasted bunch will, a decade from now, look upon 35-year-olds in much the same way. In any stroke of luck they enjoy in the marketplace, rather lower housing prices or wage inflation in the service sector will be proclaimed, quote, bad news by the older generations. Their greatest skill will go relatively unnoticed. The capacity to observe, to identify unmet needs, to be, quote, smooth and conceal feelings when necessary, to move quickly when the movement is right, and to make sure that whatever people try does in fact work as intended. Likewise, 13ers will come to believe that the best way to win individually is by taking incredible risks. They will figure that those who play by the mostly boom rules probably won't get anywhere. So why play by the rules? Does this sound familiar to any of you? Does any of you find this interesting? Am I describing you? Many will thus embrace what might be called the, quote, lottery ticket mentality, which is 13er will be prepared to risk a loss, since he'll already be losing, for a tiny chance to win big. Their career paths will take on a kinetic frenzy. 30-year-olds will jump at opportunities their elders will find inconsequential and take on long odds with elders will and take on long odds their elders will find incomprehensible. Their greatest successes will come in small business that out hustle and, thanks to low wages and benefits, underprice elder dominated rivals. And the United States Postal Service may well come under a ruinous attack from new enterprises run by the piece rate 13ers who, as a veteran bicycle messenger, delivery drivers, and computer hackers, will know how to move information more cheaply and reliably than the tenured civil servants. See, all of that now, all of this is happening now. Economic risk-taking and cultural alienation will drive 13ers to seek stability in family life. First waivers may continue the boom trend towards late marriage, not out of any quest for post-adolescent self-discovery, but rather out of an economic necessity and an unwillingness to repeat the mistakes of their early marrying, heavily divorcing silent parents. Seeing the dual income household as a necessary condition for affluence, while knowing from personal experience the perils of a latchkey childhood, 13ers of both sexes will look upon working motherhood as a temporary necessity to overcome later in life when income permits. Many will begin marriage and parenthood in silent homes. Silence being our parents, most of us, enabling them to receive substantial elder help with childcare. Once they began to tire of risk-taking, as did the Lost in the 1920s, 13ers will become more conservative in their private lives, turning away from marital infidelity and divorce. They will make a great effort to shield their offspring from the less pleasant facts of life, which we're also seeing now. Despite their economic problems, 13ers will blossom into America's leading generation of shoppers, thanks largely to purchases they will make for others in extended families or in new shopping services. Accordingly, they will have a huge influence on products, styles, and advertising, much as the Lost had in the 1920s. Once marketeers, M-I-C-K-E-Y, once marketers realize this, the American media will be barraged with messages stressing bluntness over subtlety, actions over words, the physical over the cerebral. The most successful of these messages will hint at 13er alienation and appeal to the sense of dark humor. Many ads will effectively target 13ers, will be pointedly anti-boom. For example, Pepsi might hit back at the 1990 Coca-Cola ad showing 40-ish jeans-clad boomers on a verdant hillside teaching their millennial children in the Woodstockian chant, "I'd like to teach the world to sing in perfect harmony." A retaliatory ad might run a clip of that blissful scene, jerk it fast forward in an image of old hippies, and end with a metallic clang and a message draped in black: "Drink Pepsi, the anti-Coke." Two sets of questions will haunt their rising adulthood. First, will their silent and especially boom elders learn to appreciate that this generation does indeed offer a pragmatic sensibility that America will find important, even essential, in the decades ahead? Will the silent stop despairing over how 13ers are turning out so unlike what they had envisioned, and will they instead see young adults who know how to compensate for some of the silent's own worst mistakes? Will boomers come to realize that the 13ers' very different childhood environment has endowed them with variable antidotes to the boom's own worst tendencies? Or will boomers continue to look on them not just as juniors, but as inferiors? The answer to those questions will affect the depth of the 13er alienation and the surliness of the forthcoming generational class. Get your head around that. The second set of questions, what I mean by that, is that they know what they're doing. They have studied us so much they can predict how we're going to be. And because of these predictions, that means that they can, I don't know, manipulate them, much like we've done with revelations in the Bible. Because they know these patterns take place and earthquakes show up in different places and volcanoes that you never heard of show up and the earth gets hot and the earth gets cold and whatever, stars align and some, constellation gives birth. All of these, now they go, oh, that means that God's coming. No, it means that we have a pattern of events that take place. And since you know them, instead of doing anything to change them, you just decided to, go along with the program. And that's exactly what they've done. See, they wrote this book. You don't have a copy of it. You didn't read it in school. How would you know? But this is a business book. So businesses, the ones that sell you shit, as they showed here, drink Pepsi, the anti-Coke, are using this pattern to, in fact, silence you, keep you down, keep you old, boring, and lost, so that they can manipulate you and wait you out. Because there's something interesting about the reactives that the rest of the world doesn't like. And it's our rebellious spirit. So let's see how that's going to play out. Because they're prepared for this. The second set of questions has more to do with 13ers themselves. By the spin of the cycle, whatever phase of life they happen to occupy will be, as it has already been, tempest-tossed, laden with perhaps the wrong kind of adventure for people their age. Over 4 centuries, reactive generations have been assigned the thankless job of yanking America's history back on a stable course, and afterwards have gotten few rewards for their sacrifices. I say fuck them. We ain't doing it this time. Will this realization prompt 13ers to burn out young? Or will it harden a gritty self-confidence around an important generational mission? This is our purpose here, to get them out of their unstable crisis. And we're here as the generation to do that. They don't even so much as say fucking thank you. As America's most perceptive living generation, 13ers can recognize a few crucial facts of life that boomers will not. For example, that without a little, quote, bad pragmatism, even the most noble boomer dreams will never get off the ground. More to the point, without a few black sheep to slow the shepherd, those aging boomers might really do something crazy. Holy fuckballs. So here we sit today. So entering midlife in a crisis era, 2004 through 2025, that's now. Let's see how this is going to work out for us, shall we? Early in the new century, as 40-ish 13ers watch graying Aquarians get, quote, international leadership, they will appreciate that whatever bad hand history dealt them, they at least grew up with clear heads. Their pleasure-seeking era will draw to a close, along with the worst of the idealist reactive tussle. Boomers might then start discerning in them the rough-hewn tools needed to achieve lofty boom visions, and in return, 13ers might see in boomers the leadership without which they might never find larger purpose in their own lives. Thank you. Sometime around the year 2010, this generation will hit a hangover mood like that of the Lost in the early 1930s and the Liberties in the late 1760s. Notice that, because we're going to talk about that in another video. A feeling of personal exhaustion mixed with new public seriousness. 40 and 50-year-olds will fan out across an unusually wide distribution of personal outcomes reminiscent of a night at the bingo table. A few of them will be widely successful, others totally ruined, while the large number will have lost a little ground since the days of boomer midlife. Many of the early rising stars will now be replaced in the limelight by steadier peers, the equivalent of lost, quote, brains. In what may, lost being the generation there, it's capitalized, seemed like a 21st century, quote, revenge of the nerds, or italics. Midlife Asian Americans will establish their ethnic group as a major cultural and intellectual force, akin to the midlife German Guilders or the midlife Jewish Lost. So we did see this uptick of Asian culture for a while. We had movies in Hollywood, same thing with the Hispanics now. So now they were getting their turn. I don't know what happened, because we seem to be very black and white focused at the moment, but it was there. So so take that for what it is. 13ers will make so they really just fuck any other minority. We still like to be able to see things in black and white. So, Go boomers. They're getting old. They have bad eyesight. Hair sight. What the fuck? Reading this stuff makes my head hurt. 13ers will make near perfect 50-year-olds. Hey, that's probably all of us. On the one hand, so let's listen carefully. I'll read this one without any extra added thing. Let me see. Let me see if I can. 13ers. Well, hang on a minute. Hmm. 13ers will make near perfect 50-year-olds. On the one hand, they will be nobody's fool. If you really need something done and you don't especially mind how it's done, these will be the guys to hire. On the other hand, they will be nice to be around. More experienced than their elders in the stark reality of pleasure and pain, 13-years will have that Twain-like twinkle in their eye, that Truman-esque capacity to distinguish between mistakes that matter and those that don't. In business, they will excel at cunning, flexibility, and deft timing, a far cry from the ponderous principles first boomer style. In sports, the combination of 13er coachers and millennial players may well produce a new golden era of athletic teamwork. In the military, 13ers will blossom into the kind of generals young millennial soldiers would follow off a cliff. Their leading politicians may strike old boomers as uncerebral, yet plain-spoken, sensible, quick on their feet, and more inclined to deal than to argue. In the early 21st century, 13ers will make their most enduring mark on the national culture. Their now mature keenness of observation and their capacity to step outside themselves will kick off exciting innovations in literature and filmmaking. The, quote, Brack Pack will expand and mature into the best on-screen generation since the Lost. As parents of growing children, 13ers will by now be too affectionate, too physical, too eager to prevent teenagers from suffering the same overdose of reality they will recall from their own youth. And in so doing, they will tip the scales towards overprotection of children, much as the Liberties did in the 1780s, the Gilded in the 1860s, and the Lost in the 1930s. Midlife parents, mothers especially, will hear themselves criticized by millennials for, quote, mommying a polite new generation of adaptives. 13ers will see and evaluate the crisis of 2020. Remember, this was written in 1991. They predicted the crisis in 2020. 13ers will see and evaluate the crisis of 2020 with the sharpest eye of all living generations. By life cycle position and peer personality, they will have more capacity for maneuver and can be expected to produce the crisis era's most colorful leaders and stigmatic traitors, reminiscent of how the Cavaliers produced the courageous rebels, as well as the Stuart collaborators, the Liberty, the rugged patriots, as well as the raging Tories, the Gilded, the blue and gray commanders, as well as the copperheads and bandits, and the Lost, the managers of D-Day, as well as the isolationists and fascists. Some untamed 13er factions may try to pitch the national mood towards dangerous adventure, like the pre-Civil War Gilded, or towards dangerous isolationism, like the pre-World War II Lost. If so, their own peers will be best positioned to resist. And like Arthur Vandenberg in 1941, to call their bluff. Midlife 13ers will have little ability to influence the nature and timing of whatever crisis the boom will congeal. Whatever crisis the boom will congeal. Make up. But will instead provide able on-site managers and behind-the-scene facilitators, the ones who quick decisions could spell the difference between triumph and tragedy. So they knew that, and they put people in place they could control. Controlling the boom may indeed emerge as the 13ers' most fateful life cycle mission. This will be the generation best able to deflect any boomer drift towards the apocalyptic visions. In an age of rising social intolerance, the very incorrigibility of midlife 13ers will at times be a national blessing. The task of preventing disaster may well fall to life and liberty-loving 50-year-olds, pockmarked by hard experience, to tell zealous boomers to, quote, get real, to find cannier solutions that pose fewer risks or that do less to erode personal liberty. A 13er may someday be the general or president advisor who prevents some righteous old Aquarian from, quote, losing the fateful lightning, end quote, and turning the world's lights out. A blackout. Ooh, interesting. Are we? I don't know. Those who sustain their alienation through midlife may find themselves the target of a boom millennial alliance to root out 13er pessimism, fear, or greed from public life, much as Franklin Roosevelt rallied the GIs against the lost trio of Martin, Barton, and Fish, or as Samuel Adams rallied the Republicans against the Liberty Tories. The capacity of circa 2020 50-year-olds to mellow the national mood and their success in being heard by old boomers will hinge on the ability of these two generations to calm their earlier quarrels and build mutual respect. As they age in place, they will, like siblings, half remember and half forget how they behaved towards each other in their earlier years. Whatever goes wrong in the crisis, 13ers will get more than their share of blame. Whatever goes wrong, they will get less than their share of credit. And even now, as 25-year-olds know that feeling, they had to better get used to it. When you're reactive, it comes with the territory. Lucky me. Now let's see what the future has for us as we're sitting here in the 2026 to 2047, as we're almost there. We're only, 4 years away. Entering elderhood in an outer-driven era. So now here's what's to come. So I've told you our past, I've told you our present, and now, Ebenezer, I'm going to teach you your future. At the end of the crisis era, we'll hit this generation on the opening cusps of its era of national leadership and the beginning of its physical decline. In 2025, the eldest 13ers will be 64 and the youngest 44. The crisis will have interrupted their peak earning years. That's what we're all experiencing right now. 2020 crisis is interrupting all of our midlife, our time to make money and save money for our retirement. So that's interrupted. Thanks. Many will be a bit too old to be spared personal sacrifice, a bit too old to start life over again, or too young to be spared personal sacrifice and too old to start over again. History suggests 13ers will suffer a rough and neglected old age. Those who fail to provide for themselves will end up poor by the standard of the era. Now, how can I provide myself if I'm in the middle of crisis and I can't work and I can't get a job and I can't go to work unless I do whatever crazy thing these people want to experiment on me for? How am I supposed to have any money and provide for myself? Of course I'm going to end up poor. Fuck you. When boom leaders introduce a new youth focus into public benefits program, a new youth focus, fuck, I wonder what that could be. Nudge, nudge. 13ers can expect to find themselves passed over in the transition. Those who are counting on large inheritance from affluent silent parents may find themselves subsequently taxed away by boom run legislatures. Holy fuck, that actually happened already. And when was this written again? Older generations will take a little interest and may indeed see waste in letting 13ers get something for nothing. Even self-earned private investments may prove hazardous, thanks to some 21st century equivalent of the Liberty's continental dollars and the gilded Confederate dollars. Old boom leaders, eager to reward young millennials for their public service, may resort to huge doses of inflation. Did you hear that? Old boom leaders, eager to reward their young children, the millennials, because boomers gave birth to millennials, for their public service. For those millennials. By the way, millennials is a civic generation, in case you want to know. That's why they're so special. They're a hero generation. Boom are prophets. Millennials are heroes. Xers, nomadic. And of course, our children, the Zetters, those guys are autistics. So when it says that they want to reward young millennials, that's our children. They're heroes, the heroes that are coming to save them. And how are they saving them? By lining up and doing what they're told. And they're going to give us huge doses of inflation to make sure that when the millennials are in power, we've paid for it. In effect, wiping out the accumulated private wealth claims of midlife 13ers. Doesn't that fucking suck for us? Well, it's just the pattern of things. Get over it. What did this say up here? Get used to it. Get used to it. Okay. Let me go down here. Unlike boomers, 13ers will not have spent a lifetime preparing themselves psychologically for an aesthetic old age, or I don't know what that word is. Material well-being will matter deeply to them, and they will cherish whatever remains of their economic and social independence. Yet, as they age, they will feel warmly towards younger generations they will mostly admire, and will not seek to improve their own standard of living at the expense of youth. In other words, we'll take care of our children. Rather, like the elder gilded and lost 13ers, will take a wistful pleasure in seeing their children shoot past them economically. In other words, we don't care as long as our kids. And I'm not guilty of this, not crime. I've set up my daughter. She is set up. Right? She could live for a very long time and never even have to work if necessary. So this is the kind of things that you do. Now, we're crappy generations apparently, but we try. And the men and women who were once such wild risk takers will settle into a reclusive old age, engaging in pursuits that will be seen at the time as conventional, even foggyish, as has been true for all of their reactive predecessors. The 13th will be the last generation to have fully come of age before a history-bending crisis. So they knew that we were the last generation to fully come of age before a history-bending crisis. This is our history-bending crisis, global warming, and we've all come of age before, and just like all of our reactives, right? But we'll be the last generation, right? Last generation to fully. So that's where we are in the cycle. We're always sitting right here when the crap hits the fan. Thus, they will be perceived as and feel like relics from the past, with habits and values still rooted in some repudiated old regimen. They will be crusty old conservatives, retaining the young from misjudging human nature through naive overconfidence. Sometime around the mid-2020s, 13er candidates will win a clear majority of national leadership posts. Well, they predicted that, but see, prediction means it can be changed. And I don't know how many 13er candidates are going to win clear majority right now, at least not any that have our best interests at heart. Their post-crisis presidents might well be jockish heroes like Washington, Grant, or even Eisenhower, admired more for personality than for vision. Like the gilded and the lost 13 leaders will distrust debt and inflation as instruments of public policy. Indeed, they will be inclined to keep tax rates high to force the nation to produce more than it consumes. Exactly the opposite of the national choices they will remember from their youth. Under their leadership, America will turn its energy towards building the outer world, not towards cultural depth or spiritual fervor. And yet that's what's happening. But that won't be held against 13ers. In time, the maturing millennials will fault them for a very different reason, for being do-nothing obstructionists, barriers to the execution of the unfinished moral agenda of the now lionized boomers. Holy shit. Like Increased Mather, Patrick Henry, and Mark Twain, the most popular 13 elders will warn against the danger of pushing too far and too fast in a cruel world rigged with pitfalls. But younger generations will not listen and then blame us. In an outer-driven era, the can-do millennials will be too busy coaxing smiles out of their oh-so-adorable, idealistic babies. Hero babies. Actually, millennials are turning their hero babies, and I don't know what the fuck. So let's watch how we complete it. Oh, no, that's the next one. So that's it for us. That's our past, present, and future. And then the next one is the millennial diagonal, which is the millennials, the millennial generation. And so I can actually read that too. You can see how they grew up, how they're going to be entering into their young youth in the inner driven, which is 1991 to 2003, and then how they're going to be as elders. Oh, let's go down a little bit and give a little peeky. Entering the rising adult in a crisis. This is where we're at now, 2004 to 2025. We're right at the end of this, and so early in the crisis era. And so it says, unlike us, though, they emerge undaunted thanks to their patience, confidence, and powerful instinct for community. Okay. So let's go down here. So here they are in 2026. When they're in midlife. So when they're sitting, where millennials are sitting where we are now, this describes how they're going to be. So let me see if I can just find something real interesting. It's going to pop out and piss me off. This will give historical opportunity for millennial blacks and Hispanics to achieve a far greater measure of social and political equality than their silent grandparents. I don't know. Rid the nation of racial and ethnic distinctions, and however they will be opposed by rising adaptives who will see advantage in preserving pluralism, because adaptives are our children, or an artistic generation, which actually now, since this book has been written, about when I started my studies into this, I had predicted that in fact we would see what we saw in the Civil Era 1700s, where we saw a generation disappear. We saw one absorb the other. So we saw the artistic and the hero generation become one. And so we got that all concluded. And now that in that era, there was actually only 3 generations that took place. The civic generation was removed, and you can read that in the book. And I called that a hiccup. Turns out that in my research, I realized that hiccup will and has happened another times and will happen again. And based off of everything that I was looking at, discovered that it was going to happen again in our generation. So our children and millennials are going to become one generation. So the Gen Zers and millennials will in fact absorb together. They will be called an artistic generation or civic generation, depending on which place these business people decide they want to call them. And we'll have a skip. And I wrote this down just to toot my own horn for a minute. I wrote this down and I predicted that we would have that. And lo and behold, if there's not papers today, since my discovery, since my initial, sure enough, they're writing papers and predicting the same exact thing. So you can take what I said and believe me or not believe me. I knew one thing before other people. Maybe not. All those people were clearly writing papers as well. It's just they published them. And so what I'm saying here is that it's already predicted that in fact we will lose a generation here, much like we have before, after this crisis is over. This doesn't happen in every crisis. The last time it happened was in 1776, and so after the Civil War. So that's again what you're looking at. The same type of crisis is leading to the same result, and so before they know that. So anyway, that is it for this little reading. I went almost an hour. I think it's a great book. I've left the link in the description. You can go read it yourself. Please do. It's excellent. And if you want to know what's going on, I highly recommend you do that. This is the book. Let's see. You can see it. Then you don't have to, there it is. Whoop. You don't have to, hear it from me anymore. You can read it yourself and learn yourself and make some changes other than what these fucksticks want to tell you you have to do with your life. So I would like to ask some questions. So I know I don't get a lot of kickback off of these videos, but just in general, I'd love to go back to talking about this. This is how most of you met me, and we've become friends. And now I'd really like to explore this even more because it's clear what's happening. And when I'm sitting here holding a book that tells me what's happening, that was written in 1991, I'm a little concerned with why it's still happening. If we're going to have a apocalypse, a revelations, why the fuck did we create it? Why are we going along with it? I don't understand. If you march that way, you're going to find yourself in hell. Okay, I'll march this way instead. That's a good idea. But that's not what we've done. So anyway, put in, what did this make you think of? Could you see yourself? And could you see your own behaviors? Could you see that you were falling in line with exactly what they predicted you would do long before you were, while you were still just a preteen? Could you see what crises are happening that they were explaining? Can you act? Because of course they're not going to write down transhumanism or gay agenda here, pride agenda in the book. They're going to leave that as a surprise, but they did give some examples of it, which clearly we are seeing. It's just called something else. So can you recognize what they were predicting there? And in fact, they have created, because like I said, generational studies is a business science. It's taken at Harvard Business School. And if you are a CEO, or let's see, who endorsed this? Oh yeah, Al Gore, Newt Gingrich, USA Today, the Washington Post. Let's see, who else liked it? Newsweek liked it. And yeah, beautiful. Generations might change the world as much as Darwin's Origin of Species. It said there. That's what Oakland Tribune said, is that this book might change the world as much as Darwin's Origin of Species. Fuck me, that's some powerful shit right there. Anyway, we don't think so, because we go, oh, you're a boomer. Okay, boomer. You're a Gen Xer. Okay, you loser. And, oh, you're a millennial. And we do these things instead of actually understanding what the fuck this science is about. Everybody have a good day. I'm going to do a live soon. We'll talk about it if you want. Bye.